Hello everybody and welcome to an interview as part of the Ride Leicester Festival 2020. This afternoon we've got the enormous privilege of interviewing Colin Sturgess, former world champion for the individual pursuits. Has spent a lot of time in Leicester, which is we're very proud of. Myself, Janet Hudson, and I'm with Andy Salkeld.
Hi Colin, thanks Jan. Can I start by asking you, Colin, about your early cycling history and career? Like, where did you learn to ride, and what did you do as a kid before you got into riding a bike for competition?
It's one of those things that my parents were both British internationals, and I guess I sort of fell into it through sort of following the family around to bike races when I was a toddler, and sort of running around getting dirty in puddles and grabbing chains and whatever. And then when I was about 8 years old, Mum and Dad bought me my first racing bike. I'd had little rally choppers and things like that beforehand, but Mum and Dad bought me this little 26-inch wheel racing bike with drop handlebars and gears and everything, and I absolutely loved it. Fell in love with it. So I started very young. We were actually living in Africa then, and I guess Africa is very much like Australia in as much that it's quite a supporting sort of I guess just with the weather more than anything. You've got reliable sunshine. I'm looking out the window here and thinking, if only. So there was that sort of background there, and as a teenager, I guess I was extremely fortunate enough to be a very good cyclist, to the point that Mum and Dad basically decided to up sticks from Africa to move back to Leicester. My aunt lived in Regent Road, so we had an inn here, and Mum and Dad enrolled me in Wigiston Collegiate on Regent Road, so there was a school to go to. Plus, back in the day, Saffron Lane Velodrome was the venue for track cycling in the UK, having hosted the Worlds in 1970 and again in 1982. So there was a reason to come into Leicester, not just my aunt, but the cycling as well. So that's how I fell into it. It stemmed through, as I say, just burning around on little rally grifters and rally, BMX bikes and whatever to sort of, I guess, where I ended up as a professional. So yeah, well, fantastic.
That's a great start, and it's probably one which is common to a lot of people of our generation. I will exclude Jan from that. She's obviously a lot younger than you and I are. But yeah, choppers and rally grifters. Did you ride for a specific club? Did you ride with a specific club, or were there the groups that you joined in Leicester?
Yeah, when I very first moved back, my parents had been in touch with the British Cycling Federation, as it was then, to ask, sort of what clubs were in the vicinity, and obviously we looked at Leicester Forest, and there was Owen Blower's club at the time, the Charnwood CC. But for me and for my style of racing, we chose the Zenith CC, which at the time was one of the track-based clubs, not just in Leicester, but one of the best clubs for track racing in the whole of UK. They had the Coltmans and Mick Davis and some very, very good riders in the team, and it suited my needs, it suited my style of racing, and the fact that Jan Bassett and her husband George, used to run the track league down at Saffron Lane, and they made us very, very welcome. So that was my first club back in the UK. And then I was very fortunate enough to get drafted onto one of the bigger track teams in the UK in my second year, I guess. But yeah, my first club in Leicester was Zenith, the good old Zenith.
And where was the professional club based that you joined, or what was that step?
So, back in the 80s and 90s, the sport was delineated into amateur and professional. You know, as most sports were, tennis and you know, athletics, etc., etc. So for a youngster to start, you went through the junior ranks, you know, obviously the school ranks, the junior ranks. Then you turned amateur on your 18th birthday, and you had to prove yourself with results and I guess your demeanour and your more often than not selections for national teams, etc., before you could move into the professional ranks. So my first professional team was a team called ADR, which was based in Belgium. And you know, nowadays we're relatively fortunate as a nation that a lot of our British cyclists are put through the BC system and sort of have pathway to professional racing. But back when I was a youngster, it was a rarity. So I was very, very fortunate that my results and I guess, you know, just the way I'd handled myself through a young career as a junior and Commonwealth Games and Nationals and other overseas racing, that I was drafted onto this team in Belgium. So yeah, that's where, you know, that was my first experience as a professional.
I'm really interested, Colin, because you talk about your family actually moving countries to support your career. Over the, you know, Leicester is fortunate, and I'm sure a lot of people have been inspired by yourself. We've been able to speak to Grace and Lucy Garner over the years, and Grace talks about the fact that every Friday evening, Mum would drive her up to Manchester and back so that she could go on the velodrome. So I guess that's one of the, I'm guessing your parents must have put an incredible mileage in, taking you around the country in support of it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, they did. And, you know, I'm to this day, I'm eternally thankful, you know, the sacrifice they made. You know, when we lived in South Africa, you have to understand it was still under apartheid, and it wasn't a great place to live, as I'm sure everybody knows. But they did have a very good lifestyle there, and for them to give up and to basically move over to, you know, a city that both my parents are Londoners, I should add, and they've lived in Yorkshire but never in Leicester. So to move not just once but twice in sort of 10 years to a very new area, a very new culture as well, you know, it would have been a big thing for them. They unfortunately, you know, took a massive financial hit doing so, but that sacrifice paid off for me.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, for them as well, you know, who wouldn't want to see, you know, their offspring do well at Olympics and Commonwealth Games and World Championships, etc. But you are right, you know, the mileage put in throughout the years must be phenomenal. I remember Mum and Dad taking me over to Belgium as a youngster to go and do racing over there to experience different things, or we'd go to France for a weekend. Driving up to Edinburgh to ride the velodrome for a day and come back.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of these things, it's, yeah, I mean,
It's incredible.
I know and Lucy and the Garners very, very well. And, you know, it's just what you do, I guess. And you know, we were so very, very lucky in Leicester to have a world-class velodrome. And now, unfortunately, that, you know, that's no more. And it's such a crying shame because, you know, now we do have to travel more and we do have to make those sacrifices. But yeah, I consider myself extremely fortunate.
I would just like to ask as well, Colin, because I remember the very first time, I've been on a velodrome twice. I'm a black run skier. I have never been more frightened than when I ride around the velodrome.
Terribly stubborn. Gonna have to repeat that. It's
Sorry,
completely
Colin.
great. on me, I'm afraid.
I'm just absolutely fascinated about your first time on a velodrome. So I'm a black run skier. So I'm okay with, but I have never been as scared as I am. I've only ever done it twice. I never ever want to do it again. Can you remember the first time? You know, the 45 degree, oh, come on. How on earth do you like track stands? So can you remember going on the velodrome for the first time?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it was in Africa when I must have been about 7 or 8 years of age. And as I said, I got a little racing bike. And to encourage the youngsters back then, they used to let you ride a road bike, so with brakes and gears on the track, so that at least you're getting the skill without having to go onto a specific fixed wheel track bike. And being quite an assured little 8-year-old zipping around, I decided that I'd sort of get higher and higher and higher on the velodrome. But I lost my bottle on the top of the banking. And this wasn't as steep as some of the board velodromes you see, like Leicester and Manchester and Derby, etc. This was quite a shallow, in comparison, concrete track. But nevertheless, I got stuck at the top. Dad had to come and basically talk me down. I do. There's no way I would go down the black run.
Honestly, it's easy, Colin, in comparison.
Colin, that's an amazing admission and honesty from yourself. How do you go from being stuck at the top of a concrete velodrome to reaching the pinnacle of becoming world champion?
Andy, I think it was just something I always knew I had, I guess, a gift for. The pursuit is a very specific race. It's a balancing act between endurance and speed, and not many people can get it right. But I was, again, fortunate to have that makeup. Thank God you race at the bottom of the velodrome, not at the top. But I always look at it in terms of, it's as cliched as practice makes perfect, and it's just time spent week in, week out, day in, day out, of just going through those motions, getting up in the morning and doing your training, and then you come home and you rest up, and then again in the afternoon, evening, you're down the velodrome, you're doing your drill, you're doing your specific sets, etc. And, just everything just falls into place after a certain time. And a lot of effort and a lot of sacrifice, but when it clicks very, very well.
From cyclists, like serious-minded kind of racing cyclists or distance cyclists, chain gangers that I've talked to in Leicester from the Leicester clubs, they always, those who knew you and raced with you or watched you race, are always in awe of your capabilities and what you were like. Did when you went to Belgium, so after you leave Leicester, you sign up for the ADT team. Do your parents go with you? Do you then learn those kind of like that regime of training, which takes you to the next level with ADT, or is it something which evolves at a later stage in your career? What does that look like?
It was an evolution. It was a big change. I moved to Belgium as a 19-year-old. I was one of the youngest professionals, if not, I think that year I was the youngest professional in the world at that time. And again, it was a big move. I basically put my A levels to do, Olympics, etc. So moving overseas as a 19-year-old and being put up in a studio apartment, your first time away from home for any length of time, that's a big change. But then having to learn, I guess, a language. I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak almost fluent Spanish anyway. But living there is very different, so you adapt and you basically sink or swim. And thank God I swam. but it is very difficult. And going back to what you said earlier about training, I'd always had my mum and dad on tap over here. My dad used to take me down the velodrome, used to take me out onto some of the lanes out Sharnford and Wolvie and the Leicestershire lanes and step at the side watch and do all. I didn't have that in Belgium, so I had to relearn and almost take on a lot of training and a lot of sort of coaching of myself. I had advice, but certainly not to the level that I'd had with my dad and with my mum in Leicester. And we are, I have to say, a little bit of a segue here, but we are very, very fortunate in Leicester to have some of the best training roads, I feel, in the country. There's no major climbs, that's fine, but there's enough. If you go out of your way, you can find enough climbing, make a hard day out. If you just want to stay on the flat or do small circuits, you can do so. If time trialing is your thing and you like passing, up and down dual carriageways, you can do. But there's quiet lanes where you can just ride your bike for hours in safety, in solitude, or in a small group. It's a fantastic part of the country, cycling-wise. It really, really is. And now, obviously, with, I know we were going to talk about this in a bit, but, with COVID and et cetera, and now the opening of bike lanes, et cetera, in the city, and it's just fantastic. It's second to none. And I've been to some of the world's major cities, and we are blessed. We really are in Leicester. We are blessed with a cycling-friendly city and county, to be honest.
Oh, that's a great accolade coming from yourself, particularly, Colin. So that's that's something we can all be proud of and share and enjoy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jan.
Being World Pursuit Champion, Colin, is just an extraordinary achievement. So talk us through the journey from being the 19-year-old in Belgium. I guess what you were kind of saying, was it almost like your responsibility in that team framework to turn up ready, your own fitness became your responsibility. Talk us through the journey from that 19-year-old to then the podium.
Like you say, it's you have the framework there built up over years and years of youth cycling, junior, amateur, going through Commonwealth Games and Olympics and things like that. And then, as I say, the professional ranks are very difficult in as much that, it's very cutthroat. Not saying that cycling isn't or Olympic sport isn't, but there is a very big difference between that sort of European style of racing and to have to relearn things and to, I guess, change one's mindset. It can make or break a lot of riders, and it used to, particularly from I guess New World, and Britain used to be sort of in cycling terms, a New World country. We were always very, very good in our own backyard, but to go over to the continent, the same with the Australians and the Americans coming over and other emerging nations, it wasn't as common then in the late 80s, early 90s, and even into the 2000s as it is now. So for me, it was a fairly steep learning curve, and I think if I'm honest with myself, I did most things well. I think, again, with the wonder of hindsight, there are certain things I would change. But as a young man living abroad and doing it for the first time, you do make mistakes, and I think I should have had a longer career over there, and I think probably I should have won more than one World Championships. But that, again, is very easy to say with hindsight. But it is a journey, and it's not always an easy one, but it's a very rewarding one. And if there are any youngsters or anybody that is in any way keen on pursuing their future, do it. You don't know until you roll the dice and give it a shot.
It's pretty evident, Colin, that you were the trailblazer in this world. You know, for you, you were the first person to go out and actually to do that. And if you look at all of the support networks that are around young athletes in today's world, or you know, for the past 5 or so years, it's nothing like the experience you would have had. You know, to try and put ourselves in your position as a perhaps the language barrier wasn't such a big thing, but nevertheless, a whole new culture, a whole new world. That is, you know, that in itself is amazing. Let alone then what you were there to do. Can you actually remember crossing the finishing line, winning the world champion pursuit?
I do, very, very clearly. If anybody's ever YouTubed it, there's a great little clip from the BBC, and it shows the final ride. There are other rounds, you know, qualification, semi-finals, etc. But the YouTube video that's most played is the final, where probably can make a cut.
Colin, with
but that was I wouldn't say all part of the plan, but it was a case of I knew I had reserves. And I knew
Colin, do you mind?
And then I'm quite renowned for my fast finish in my last kilometre of the pursuit. So to actually go ahead and just, you know.
Colin, we've got connection problems. Can we?
It worked, and I do remember with about half a lap of the velodrome to go, just having a very quick look across and being able to eyeball my opponent and know I've got him beaten, and this is going to be, you know, this will be life changing, life affirming. And coming across the line, I sort of get the arm in the air and a big wave to the crowd. And yeah, I mean, there's no other feeling in the world quite like winning a major championships. And you know, that can be a world championships, Commonwealth Games, an Olympics, a national tour. You know, it can be park run 5 kilometres if that's what you set your goal for. But yeah, there's just that achievement is there.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. We lost a little bit of that, Colin, because the connection was a bit shaky.